Good day. Welcome to Scriptures Unlocked. In the previous presentation, I looked at the use of Elohim in the scriptures, and we found that Elohim is a term that is used for spiritual beings. It is used mostly for the only true God, Jehovah, the God of Israel, 90% of the times in the Old Testament. It is also used for other spiritual beings, such as angels. It is also used for devils or demons. It is also used for idols made by men's hands, which represents the actual gods that they worship. In this presentation, I'll be looking at the God of Israel versus the other gods. And this is a theme that runs right throughout the Old Testament. And we'll see how this battle between the God of Israel and the other gods have played out throughout the pages of Scripture. And you'll realize that from Genesis chapter 12 onwards, when Abraham was called, you will see a conflict between the nation of Israel, who are the seed of Abraham, and the surrounding nations. I'll explain and show from Scripture what has been happening throughout human history since the creation of nations. So let's get into it. So this presentation is entitled, The God of Israel versus the Other Gods. It is very clear from Scripture that Jehovah is the supreme God or the supreme Elohim of the universe, and that there are other heavenly beings who are also called Elohim or gods. Hence, these gods were not mere idols, but real spiritual beings. A careful reading of the Old Testament also reveals that there was constant antagonism between the children of Israel and the surrounding nations. These nations had various gods, but Jehovah was the God of Israel. Notice what we are told in Deuteronomy 6, verse 14. And this is God speaking to the people of Israel through Moses. Ye shall not go after other gods, of the gods of the people which are round about you. So clearly, the other people, other nations that are around Israel had their gods. Judges 2, verse 12. And they forsook Jehovah, God of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods of the gods of the people that were round about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked Jehovah to anger. 2 Chronicles 25, verse 15. Wherefore the anger of Jehovah was kindled against Amaziah, and he sent unto him a prophet, which said unto him, Why hast thou sought after the gods of the people, which could not deliver their own people out of thine hand? So clearly, so far, viewers, you see that the nation surrounding Israel had other gods. And these were not idols. These were real spiritual beings that they worshipped as gods. Notice Rabshakeh's boast in 2 Kings 18, verse 33 onwards. Notice what he said to Hezekiah when he sought to besiege Jerusalem. He said this to Hezekiah and the people that were standing there. Hath any of the gods of the nations delivered at all his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and of Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim, Hena, and Ivah? Have they delivered Samir out of my hand? So he's saying that the other gods are nations, and when he went against them, he and his God was able to conquer all these other nations, and their gods could not deliver them out of his hand. 2 Kings 18, verse 35, he said this, Who are they among all the gods of the countries that have delivered their country out of mine hand, that Jehovah should deliver Jerusalem out of mine hand? So that was his boast. He was saying that when he went against other nations who had other gods, he was able to overcome them, and their gods could not deliver them out of his hands. But what he did not know is that even though there are other Elohim, no other Elohim can be compared to Jehovah, the only true God of the universe, the creator of all. So he was now going to be taught a lesson to make it clear that Jehovah, the God of Israel, was not like other gods. So Rabshakeh knew that spiritual beings or gods had dominion over the nations. But he and the king of Assyria made a mistake in thinking that Jehovah was on the same level as the other gods of the nations. Because notice what he said in 2 Kings 18, verse 35. He was saying to Hezekiah, who are they among all the gods of the countries that have delivered their country out of mine hand? That Jehovah should deliver Jerusalem out of mine hand. So he was saying the same thing that happened to the other countries will happen to Jerusalem and Judah, because their gods could not deliver them out of his hand, and neither will Jehovah deliver Jerusalem out of his hand. He continues to say, and this is from 2 Chronicles 32, verse 15, which is a parallel passage to what we read earlier. Now, therefore, let not Hezekiah deceive you, nor persuade you on this manner, neither yet believe him, for no God of any nation or kingdom was able to deliver his people out of mine hand, and out of the hand of my fathers. How much less shall your God deliver you out of mine hand? He wrote also letters to rail on Jehovah, God of Israel. So notice, Jehovah was called the God of Israel, which he was, and to speak against him, saying, as the gods of the nations of other lands have not delivered their people out of mine hand, so shall not the God of Hezekiah deliver his people out of mine hand. Rabshakeh and Sennacherib, who was the king of Assyria, were now going to be taught a lesson about the superiority of the God of Israel. Notice what we are told in 2 Kings 19, verse 1. And it came to pass, when King Hezekiah heard it, that he rent his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth, and went into the house of Jehovah. And he sent Eliakim, which was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and the elders of the priests, covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amoz. And they said unto him, thus saith Hezekiah, this day is a day of trouble, and of rebuke, and blasphemy. For the children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth. And notice chapter 19, verse 4. It may be Jehovah thy God will hear all the words of Rabshakeh, whom the king of Assyria his master had sent to reproach the living God, and will reprove the words which Jehovah thy God had heard. Wherefore lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left. And Isaiah said unto them, thus shall ye say to your master, thus saith Jehovah, be not afraid of the words which thou hast heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. So this is God speaking through Isaiah. Behold, I will send a blast upon him, and he shall hear a rumor, and shall return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. And Hezekiah prayed before Jehovah, and said, O Jehovah, God of Israel, which dwellest between the cherubim, thou art the God, even thou alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. Thou hast made heaven and earth. Jehovah, bow down thine ear and hear. Open, Jehovah, thine eyes and see, and hear the words of Sennacherib, which had sent him to reproach the living God. And then Hezekiah was now going to say, of a truth, the kings of Assyria have destroyed the nations and their lands. But Hezekiah was now going to make the mistake that many people have made when he said this, and have cast their gods into the fire, for they were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone, therefore they have destroyed them. Hezekiah thought that the idols that they worship were actual gods that they worship, but the idols were mere representation of the actual spiritual beings who are gods over these nations. He went on to say this as he prayed to God, now therefore, O Jehovah, our God, I beseech thee, save thou us out of his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that thou art Jehovah, God, even thou only. Then Isaiah the son of Amoz sent to Hezekiah, saying, thus saith Jehovah, God of Israel. Notice, I'm repeating that Jehovah, the only true God, is the God of Israel. That which thou hast prayed to me against Sennacherib, king of Assyria, I have heard. Therefore, thus saith Jehovah concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with shield, nor cast a bank against it. By the way that he came, by the same shall he return, and shall not come into this city, saith Jehovah. For I will defend this city, to save it for mine own sake, and for my servant David's sake. And notice what God was now going to do. And it came to pass that night that the angel of Jehovah went out and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000, that's 185,000 men. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria. And it came to pass as he was worshipping in the house of Nisra, his god. So notice, the Assyrians had their god, whose name was Nisra, that Adramelech and Sharezer, his sons, smote him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Armenia, and Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his stead. So viewers, he made a boast against Jehovah, God of Israel, and he was taught a lesson. God told him that he would not enter the city of Jerusalem, which is the holy city, God's holy city. He would not even shoot an arrow there. God said, you will hear a rumor. He will return into his own land, and there he will fall. And his own sons assassinated him while he was worshiping his God. So God proved that he is superior to all other gods. So when Rabshakeh made that boast that he has conquered all these other cities and their gods could not deliver them from him, he thought that Jehovah, the only true God, the God of Israel, was just like these other gods, like they were on the same level. As I mentioned in the previous presentation, Jehovah is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Jehovah. Jehovah is the supreme being of the universe. So viewers, all the surrounding nations worshipped various gods, but Israel's God is Jehovah, and he is the creator of heaven and earth. Notice Joshua 24, verse 15. Joshua said this to the people, and if it seem evil unto you to serve Jehovah, choose you this day whom ye will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, that is, before they crossed Jordan, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve Jehovah. So notice, the Amorites had their gods, and their fathers before they came over had their gods. But according to Joshua, his God was Jehovah, and he will serve Jehovah. Judges 10 verse 6 says this, and the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of Jehovah, and served Baalim, and Ashtaroth, and the gods of Syria, and the gods of Zidon, and the gods of Moab, and the gods of the children of Ammon, and the gods of the Philistines, and forsook Jehovah and served not him. So notice, all these other nations had their gods. These were real spiritual beings that they worshipped. And they had names, Baalim, Ashtaroth, and so forth. We know the Philistines' god was Dagon. These people, the people of other nations, had other gods that they worshipped, but Israel's God was Jehovah. Notice 1 Kings 11 verse 33. Because they have forsaken me and have worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Milcom, the god of children of Ammon, and have not walked in my ways to do that which is right in mine eyes, and to keep my statutes and my judgments, as did David his father. So notice again, three gods worshipped by the nations were mentioned by name: Ashtoreth, Chemosh, and Milcom. Notice 2 Kings 1 verse 2. And Ahaziah fell down through a lattice in his upper chamber that was in Samaria, and was sick. And he sent messengers and said unto them, Go inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, whether I shall recover of this disease. So notice again, viewers, Baal-zebub was the name of the god of Ekron. It was not an idol made by men's hands. They may have made an image to represent Baal-zebub, but he said, notice what he said, go and inquire of Baal-zebub. It was another being, another spiritual being that they worship as their God. You cannot inquire of an idol made of wood and stone. Notice verse 16 of the same chapter. He went to inquire of the God of Ekron. Notice what God was now going to say to him. Thus saith Jehovah, for as much as thou hast sent messengers to inquire of Baal-zebub, the God of Ekron, is it not because there is no God in Israel to inquire of his word? Therefore, thou shalt not come down off that bed on which thou art gone up, but shalt surely die. So instead of consulting the God of Israel, because he was an Israelite, he forsook his own God and went to inquire of Baal-zebub, the God of Ekron. Notice, viewers, the names of these gods. Ashtoreth, you are seeing the Hebrew script for the name of this particular god. It appears 3 times in the Hebrew scriptures. Ashtoreth means star. It is the principal female deity of the Phoenicians worshipped in war and fertility. It is the same god worshipped by the Greeks and Romans, but the Greeks call Ashtoreth Ishtar, and the Romans call Ashtoreth Astarte. So Ashtoreth was a Phoenician goddess of love and increase. Notice 1 Kings 11 verse 5. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So even Solomon, that king that was greatly beloved by Jehovah, God of Israel, he too went after other gods and worshipped them on account of his many wives that he chose. Notice Chemosh, the god of the Moabites. It appears 8 times. The name Chemosh appears 8 times in the scripture. Chemosh means subduer. It is a national deity of the Moabites and a god of the Ammonites. It is also identified with Baal Peor or Baal-zebub or Mars and Saturn by the Romans. The worship of this god was introduced into Jerusalem by Solomon and abolished by King Josiah of Judah. So viewers, you're seeing that these gods are actual beings that had names given to them by the people that worship them. Next god here is Malcham, also known as Milcom or Molech. Malcham appears 4 times in the Hebrew scriptures. It is translated as Milcom 3 times and Malcham once. Milcom means great king. He was the god of the Ammonites and Phoenicians, to whom some Israelites sacrificed their infants in the valley of Hinnom. He's also called Molech. And here you are seeing on screen a picture of Israelites sacrificing their infants, child sacrifice, to Milcom or Molech, something that was forbidden by Jehovah, God of Israel, but yet still they did it. Baal-zebub or Baal-zevuv appears 4 times in the Hebrew scriptures. It simply means Lord of the Fly. It was a Philistine deity worshipped at Ekron. So viewers, you are seeing so far from scripture, not my own words, that these other gods were actual beings that were worshipped by the gods, by the people of the nations. The question is, how did the nations come to worship other gods? That is the question. The answer to this question can be found in the book of Deuteronomy, but can be traced all the way back to the book of Genesis. Notice what Moses wrote when he gave his final speech to the children of Israel in what is known as the Song of Moses, found in Deuteronomy 32. He said this, "Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. My doctrine shall drop as the rain, my speech shall distill as the dew, as a small rain upon the tender herb, and as the showers upon the grass. Because I will publish the name of Jehovah. Ascribe ye greatness unto our God." So notice, Jehovah was considered the God of Israel. He is the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment. A God of truth and without iniquity. Just and right is he. They have corrupted themselves. Their spot is not the spot of his children. They are a perverse and crooked generation. He was talking about the children of Israel. Do ye thus requite Jehovah, O foolish people and unwise? Is not he thy father that had bought thee? Hath he not made thee or established thee? And notice what he was now going to say in Deuteronomy 32, verse 7 to 9, the key passage which tells us how the nations got their gods. He said this, "Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations." So he's going way back. Ask thy father, and he will show thee, thy elders, and they will tell thee. Notice now verse 8. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For Jehovah's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. I want us to focus on Deuteronomy 32, verse 8 and 9, in particular verse 8. There's a lot to unpack from Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, because it tells us that the Most High did something at a particular point in time in human history that resulted in other Elohim or other gods being placed over the nations to govern them. However, there's a textual discrepancy with Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, because the Masoretic text, which is the basis for the most modern translations of the Old Testament, reads as sons of Israel or children of Israel, whereas the Dead Sea Scroll reads as sons of God. And it makes a big difference. The Dead Sea Scrolls are ancient Jewish manuscripts found in caves at Qumran. Here is a picture of the caves at Qumran near the Dead Sea in the West Bank. Here is cave number 4, where 90% of the scrolls were found. And here is a view of the Dead Sea from a cave at Qumran, where some of the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. Viewers, the Septuagint, or LXX, which means 70, is the Roman numeral for 70. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which is the earliest translation of the Hebrew Bible from the original Hebrew. The Septuagint translates Deuteronomy 32, verse 8 as angels of God. So God separated the sons of Adam according to the number of the angels of God. And here is the Septuagint reading. The last two words are angelon theou, which means angels of God. So viewers, Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, the Masoretic text says that the peoples were divided by God according to the number of the sons of Israel. That's the Masoretic text. But according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, it says God fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. The Septuagint says God fixed the borders of the people according to the angels of God. Here you are seeing on screen below the Dead Sea Scroll of Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. It reads as B'nai Elohim, which is translated as sons of God. And the Dead Sea Scroll is the oldest written manuscript of the Hebrew scriptures. Here it is magnified. So here you're seeing, this is the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is B'nai Elohim. This is what was actually written in Hebrew in this Dead Sea Scroll of Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. Here it has been carbon dated, and it reads as B'nai Elohim, which is the Hebrew for sons of God. Here again, you're seeing a photocopy of the Dead Sea Scroll. It was found in Cave 4, which is why it says 4Q Deuteronomy J. It is one of the fragmentary Dead Sea Scrolls from Qumran, showing variant reading in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, which reads as sons of God, which is equivalent to angels instead of children of Israel. What you're seeing on screen here is the Masoretic text, which have these diacritical markings, which aids in reading and pronunciation of the Hebrew text for non-Hebrew speakers. And in the Masoretic text, it has B'nai Yisrael, which translates as the sons of Israel. But according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, when the Most High apportioned the nations, when he separated humankind, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God, B'nai Elohim. Viewers, I want you to notice how the various English translations of the Bible have translated Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. And as mentioned before, the Masoretic text is a text from which most of our modern English Bibles have been translated from. So most of them will say sons of Israel. Only a few Bible versions have translated the latter part of the verse as sons of God. Here is the translation of Deuteronomy 32 verse 8. You have the King James Version, which I've been using. The New King James Version says the same thing, according to the number of the children of Israel. The New Living Translation says this, that the people were divided according to the number in his heavenly court. And there's a footnote there. And the footnote says, the Dead Sea Scrolls, which read the number of the sons of God, and the Greek version, which is the Septuagint, reads the number of the angels of God, while the Masoretic text reads the number of the sons of Israel. The NIV also has, according to the number of the sons of Israel, and there's also a footnote. The English Standard Version has it correctly, in my view, and I'll explain why it is correct later on. So when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. You have the Christian Standard Bible. Most of these have, according to the number of the sons of Israel. Notice the NET. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided up humankind, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the heavenly assembly. And the Revised Standard Version says according to the number of the sons of God, which is also correct. Heavenly assembly can also work. The Dead Sea Scrolls is the oldest translation of the Hebrew Bible. The Septuagint is also older than the Masoretic text. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, they were discovered over a period of 10 years between 1946 and 1956 at the Qumran Caves in the West Bank on the northern shore of the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea Scrolls date back from the 3rd century BCE, that is before the Common Era, that is before Christ, to the 1st century CE. The Septuagint, on the other hand, is the Koine Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, and this was done between the 3rd and 2nd century BCE, before the Common Era, before Christ was born. It was translated by Jews living in the Ptolemaic dynasty because few of their countrymen could speak or even read in the Hebrew language during the Second Temple period. And the Second Temple period spans from 516 BCE, which is when the Second Temple was rebuilt after Solomon's temple was destroyed, up until AD 70, when that temple was destroyed by Titus, the Roman general. The Masoretic text, on the other hand, which is the most recent text of the Hebrew scriptures, it is the authoritative Hebrew and Aramaic text of the Hebrew Bible, which is known as the Tanakh. T stands for Torah, N stands for Nevi'im, which are the prophets, and the K stands for Ketuvim, which are the writings, like Psalm and Proverbs. The Masoretic text was copied, edited, and distributed by a group of Jews known as the Masoretes between the 7th and 10th centuries of the Common Era. So viewers, we have a discrepancy between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint when compared to the Masoretic text. So the Dead Sea Scroll has, according to the sons of God, the Septuagint has, according to the angels of God, and the Masoretic text, according to the sons of Israel, or children of Israel. Let's now decipher which is the correct reading. How do we then make sense of this discrepancy in the translation of Deuteronomy 32, verse 8? According to whom did God set the boundaries of the people? That is the question. Viewers, the correct wording of the last phrase in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8 has to be the sons of God and not the children of Israel or the sons of Israel, because the context of the verse is a clear reference to what transpired at the Tower of Babel. The reason it cannot be the children of Israel is simple, or the sons of Israel, because the children of Israel or the sons of Israel did not exist when God divided and scattered the people at the Tower of Babel. Israel did not exist as a nation as yet, as we can see from Genesis 10 to 11, which took place after the flood that destroyed the antediluvian world. So God could not have divided the nations at the Tower of Babel according to the children of Israel, or according to the sons of Israel, because Israel did not exist as a nation. Immediately after the flood, viewers, God gave Noah and his sons a mandate to be fruitful, multiply, and populate the earth. But years later, mankind decided to rebel against the Most High at the Tower of Babel. Notice Genesis 9 verse 1 and Genesis 7. Notice what God told Noah and his 3 sons immediately after coming out of the ark. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Verse 7 says, and you, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein. However, viewers, when the people got to the land of Shinar, they decided that they were not going anywhere else because they did not want to be scattered. And this was contrary to God's express command and a clear defiance of God's divine authority. So they did not want, their fear was not to be scattered, even though God told Noah and his descendants to spread out and replenish the earth and subdue it. Notice what we are told in Genesis 11, reading from verse 1 onwards. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech, meaning they had one dialect. They understood each other. They used the same vocabulary. They had one language. And notice what happened. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And notice what they said in verse 4. And they said, go to, let us build us a city, and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. So notice what they wanted to do. They wanted to build a city, which was fine, and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. They also wanted to make a name for themselves. And their fear was, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth. And Jehovah came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And Jehovah said, behold, the people is one, they are united, and they all have one language. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. So viewers, since the people did not want to be dispersed, God intervened, confounded their language, and scattered them by dividing mankind into different nations with different languages or tongues, which is what Genesis 10 outlined. Notice what God did in Genesis 11, verse 7 to 9. Go to, let us go down and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So Jehovah scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because Jehovah did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did Jehovah scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. This is the event that Moses was referencing when he said this in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. Remember the days of old, when the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance and separated the sons of Adam. To concretize the point, the Hebrew word translated as separated, used in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, appears twice in Genesis chapter 10, which outlines the table of nations that emerged after the flood. The Hebrew word translated as separated in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, is the Hebrew word parad. It occurs only 26 times in the Hebrew scriptures. It is Strong's H6504. It has been translated as separate 12 times, part 4 times, divide 3 times, scattered abroad once, dispersed once, scattered once, severed once, and so forth. It simply means to separate, to divide, to be separated, to make a division, which is what God did at the Tower of Babel when he confounded their languages and placed them, as a result, in nations. Genesis 10 outlines all the people, languages, and nations that descended from Noah's 3 sons. Notice what we are told. I'll read the sections highlighted in red. Now, these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood. And these are the names of the son. Look at Genesis 10, verse 5 now. Having listed all the sons of Japheth, Genesis 10, verse 5 says this: by these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families, in their nations. So the sons of Japheth spread out because all of them started to speak different languages, and they were divided. Everyone that spoke the same language congregated together, and they formed individual nations. Notice Genesis 10, verse 6. And the sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. And you can see all the other sons of Ham and their descendants. And notice verse 18 of chapter 10. And afterward, the families of the Canaanites spread abroad. These are the sons of Ham, after their families, after their tongues, in their countries, and in their nations. So even Ham's sons and their children were divided and placed in different nations, and they all spoke different languages. Verse 21, unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth, the elder, even to him were children born. And these are the names of Shem's descendants, as you can see on screen. And notice verse 31 and 32. These are the sons of Shem, after their families, after their tongues, in their lands, after their nations. So even Shem's descendants were divided in nations, and they spoke different tongues or languages. Verse 32 says, these are the families of the sons of Noah, after their generations, in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. So viewers, it was this story that Moses was referencing when he said, when the Most High divided the people and gave them their inheritance, he divided them according to the sons of God. Notice that the word Gentiles is Strong's H1471. It simply means nations, as you can see here. This word here for nations is the word Gentiles. It is the Hebrew word goy. It is translated as nations 374 times, heathen 143 times, Gentiles 30 times, and people 11 times. It appears a total of 558 times in the Hebrew scriptures. So Gentiles simply mean nations. So here on screen, you are seeing Noah's descendants, all the names that we saw in Genesis chapter 10. Genesis chapter 10 is referred to as the table of nations. So you had Noah, his 3 sons, Japheth, 14 descendants emerged from Japheth. Shem had 26 descendants, and Ham had 30 descendants. So in total, there were 70 people listed in Genesis chapter 10. So 70 nations were formed as a result of God confounding the languages at the Tower of Babel. And here's a map of how these 70 nations were dispersed across the then known world. So you have Noah's sons here, Japheth, his descendants are listed in pink, Shem's descendants are listed in purple, and Ham's descendants are color-coded in green. Ham descendants migrated to Africa. African continent is called the land of Ham. Ham's son, Mizraim, became the nation of Egypt. So Ham, his descendants migrated to Africa. Japheth's descendants migrated to Europe and a part of Asia. So places like Russia, which is Meshech, that is where Japheth's descendants went. Tarshish, you're seeing here, is what we call today as Spain. So Japheth's descendants migrated and congregated in their various nations, and they took over the European continent. Shem's descendants migrated to the Middle East. They stayed in the Middle Eastern area and part of Asia. So when you see like places like Aram, Aram became Syria. Here you are seeing Uz, where Job came from. So the sons of Shem, they migrated and settled in Arabia. So places like Iraq, Iran, Jordan, these places are occupied by descendants of Shem. The name Shem is where we get the name Semite from. So the Semitic languages were formed as a result of Shem's descendants. So Arabic and Hebrew and these languages they are called Semitic languages. So this is how they were scattered abroad after the Tower of Babel, and they were dispersed into 70 nations, and they took over the world as a result of that. So every single person that is living on earth today are descendants of one of Noah's 3 sons. After scattering the descendants of Noah, God set the bounds of the people according to the number of the sons of God, and placed these heavenly beings over the nations to govern them, since they rebelled against his divine authority. So these 70 nations were handed over to angelic beings, heavenly beings, and they were to govern according to God's will and God's holy character. And notice in the list in Genesis chapter 10, there was no mention of Israel. Israel as a nation never existed at the point when the people were scattered as a result of rebellion at the Tower of Babel. So this is why, viewers, the Septuagint renders Deuteronomy 32 verse 8 as angels of God, because the Jewish translators knew and understood that the phrase B'nai Elohim means sons of God, and it's a clear reference to heavenly beings. Viewers, Deuteronomy 32 verse 8 is describing God disowning and disinheriting the nations by allotting to them members of his heavenly council, while Deuteronomy 32 verse 9 states that Jacob, who became Israel, because his name was changed to Israel, is the lot of his inheritance. That's God's inheritance. So God gave up the nations since they refused to submit to his command. He gave them up, he disowned them, he disinherited them, and he placed angelic beings over them to rule over them and to govern them according to his will. But he was then going to choose Israel for his inheritance, but Israel did not exist at that time. So Deuteronomy 32 verse 8 to 9 provides a clear contrast between the various nations and Israel. And remember, Deuteronomy 32 is recounting what happened. Moses was telling the people to remember what happened, how God chose them to be his people. So there's a clear contrast between verse 8 and verse 9. God gave up these nations, he placed heavenly beings over them to rule over them, and he chose Israel as his nation. To further corroborate this point, notice what Moses also stated earlier in the book of Deuteronomy. And this is in Deuteronomy chapter 4. Notice what Moses said. And look out for the contrast between the other nations and Israel. Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments. He's speaking to the children of Israel, even as Jehovah my God commanded me, that ye should do so in the land whither ye go to possess it. Keep therefore to do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations. So there it is. Which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation Israel is a wise and understanding people. Moses then asks the question, for what nation, what of the 70 nations is there so great, who hath God so nigh unto them, as Jehovah our God is in all things that we call upon him for? And what nation out of the 70 is there so great, that hath statutes and judgments so righteous as this law, which I set before you this day? Only take heed to thyself, and keep thy soul diligently, lest thou forget the things which thine eyes have seen, and lest they depart from thy heart all the days of thy life. But teach them thy sons and thy son's son, especially the day that thou stoodest before Jehovah thy God in Horeb. He's remembering Mount Sinai experience, when Jehovah said unto me, gather me the people together, and I will make them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days that they shall live upon the earth, and that they may teach their children. And he came near and stood under the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire unto the midst of heaven, with darkness, clouds, and thick darkness. So you can clearly see that Moses was recounting what happened in Exodus 19 when the children of Israel came and met God at Mount Sinai. Notice what he went on to say. Deuteronomy 4 verse 12. And Jehovah spake unto you out of the midst of the fire. Ye heard the voice of the words, but saw no similitude, only ye heard a voice. So they did not see any physical manifestation of God. They only heard his voice. And he declared unto you his covenant. So he made a covenant with them at that point in time. And what was the covenant? He declared unto you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, even 10 commandments. So the 10 commandments were the basis of the covenant. And he wrote them upon 2 tables of stone. And Jehovah commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, that ye might do them in the land whither ye go over to possess it. Take ye therefore good heed unto yourselves, for ye saw no manner of similitude on the day that Jehovah spake unto you in Horeb out of the midst of the fire. So he's repeating himself. Lest ye corrupt yourselves and make you a graven image, the similitude of any figure, the likeness of male or female, because this was what the nations were doing. They made physical idols, graven images, to represent the gods that they worship. So God was saying to them, don't make you any graven image, the similitude of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any beast that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged fowl that flieth in the air, the likeness of anything that creepeth on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the waters beneath the earth. And notice what he then says in Deuteronomy 4 verse 19, which is a key verse, which ties in with Deuteronomy 32 verse 8. Notice what he said. Unless thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun, the moon, and the stars, which are the celestial objects. And then he went on to say, even all the host of heaven shouldest be driven to worship them and serve them, which Jehovah thy God hath divided. Notice that word. Hath divided unto all nations under the whole heaven. So pay keen attention, viewers, to Moses' words in Deuteronomy 4 verse 19, because he clearly stated that God divided the host of heaven to all nations, which supports what he later said in Deuteronomy 32 verse 8, that God divided to the nations according to the sons of God. The question is, who are the host of heaven? The host of heaven can refer to the sun, moon, stars, or planets. It can also refer to the angelic host. Notice what we are told in 1 Kings 22 verse 19. And this is when Micaiah, the prophet, was given a glimpse in God's heavenly council meeting. And he said this, hear thou therefore the word of Jehovah. He was speaking to Ahab, king of Israel at the time, with Jehoshaphat standing by him. This is what he said. I saw Jehovah sitting on his throne, and all the hosts of heaven standing by him on his right hand and on his left. Who are these heavenly hosts? These are angels that were gathered around in the council meeting that was being held. So the host of heaven does refer to angelic host. Notice as well Nehemiah 9 verse 6. Thou, even thou art Jehovah alone. Thou hast made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and all things that are therein, the seas and all that is therein, and thou preservest them all. And the host of heaven worshipeth thee. The host of heaven here is referring to the angels who worship God in heaven. So the host of heaven can refer to the sun that rises in the east and sets in the west. It can refer to the moon that comes out at night and the stars, but it can also refer to the angelic host that lives in heaven with God. So the host of heaven that God divided to the nations were actual angels that he divided or allotted or assigned to these 70 nations. Viewers, the host of heaven is undoubtedly a clear reference to angelic beings in the context, but to prove that the angels who are sons of God were assigned to the nations, let's examine the Hebrew word translated as divided in Deuteronomy 4 verse 19. I'm being very meticulous and detailed as I go through the scriptures. The Hebrew word translated as divided in Deuteronomy 4, verse 19, is the Hebrew word halak. It occurs 65 times in the scriptures. It is Strong's H 2505. It is translated as divide 40 times, and so forth. It means to divide, to allot, to apportion, or to assign. So viewers, Moses was telling Israel that the Most High gave territorial jurisdiction and authority to angels when he allotted, apportioned, and assigned these heavenly beings to the 70 nations that were scattered at the Tower of Babel. Notice how the following Bible versions have translated Deuteronomy 4, verse 19. The American Standard Version, the Young's Literal Translation, and the Darby Translation. So having said, unless thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the hosts of heaven, thou be drawn away and worship them and serve them, which Jehovah thy God hath allotted. Notice that word is the same word as divided. Jehovah thy God hath allotted unto all the peoples under the whole heaven. The Young's Literal Translation says, Jehovah thy God hath apportioned to all the peoples under the whole heavens. And the Darby Translation says, Jehovah thy God hath assigned unto all peoples under the whole heavens. Angelic beings were placed over these nations to govern them because they rebelled against God's authority. So God disowned them, he disinherited them, and he placed members of his heavenly council over them to govern them. So viewers, after his words in Deuteronomy 4, verse 19 about the other nations, Moses then makes the contrast with Israel, which is a parallel to what he said in Deuteronomy 32, verse 9, about Israel being Jehovah's portion. So having said what he said in Deuteronomy 4, verse 19, notice what Moses then said in Deuteronomy 4, verse 20. But Jehovah had taken you, Israel, and brought you forth out of the iron furnace, even out of Egypt, to be unto him a people of inheritance, as ye are this day, because Israel now became Jehovah's portion. His allotted portion were the children of Israel. Additionally, Moses also stated this after mentioning the curses found in Deuteronomy 28 and what God would do to Israel if they forsook him and worship other gods. He said, what I will do to you if you forsake me and worship other gods, the nations around you will say this, and notice what they will say and what the response will be. Deuteronomy 29, verse 24. Even all nations shall say, wherefore hath Jehovah done thus unto this land? What meaneth the heat of this great anger? Then men shall say, because they have forsaken the covenant of Jehovah, God of their fathers, which he made with them when he brought them forth out of the land of Egypt. For they went and served other gods and worshipped them, gods whom they knew not, and whom he had not given unto them. Notice that word again. Strong's H 2505, it is halak, which means to allot, to assign, and to apportion. So what Moses was saying here is that God will make Israel desolate, and people will say, why has God done this to this land? And the response is because they have served other gods and worshiped them, gods whom they knew not and whom he, Jehovah, had not given unto them. So the clear implication is this, that God gave the other nations other gods, other Elohim, but Israel was his people and he was their God. And because they have forsaken him and have served the other gods whom he had not given unto them, he was going to punish them and he was going to drive them out of the land of Israel, which is what he did. The 10 tribes of Israel were scattered abroad after the Assyrians conquered them. Judah was sent into Babylonian captivity for 70 years because they forsook God, Jehovah, the God of their fathers, and served other gods whom he had not given unto them. So the scripture is clear, viewers, that God, at the time when he confounded the language at the Tower of Babel, he placed 70 sons of God over the nations. And years later, he would choose one man, namely Abraham, to establish and form a nation which he will take for himself. And that nation became known as the children of Israel. And he, Jehovah, was going to be their God. They were his people. They were his allotted inheritance or his allotted heritage. So viewers, the scriptures are clear that other nations were given other gods, other Elohim, to rule over them because they rejected God's authority at the Tower of Babel. But Israel was going to be God's people. And that is why from now on, when Israel was established, you hear the constant phrase, Jehovah, God of Israel. Jehovah, thy God. Jehovah, our God. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, or the God of Israel, because Jacob's name was renamed to Israel. So he became their God, and the other nations had their God, who was to rule them according to God's will. So this is a comparison that was being made in Deuteronomy 4, verse 19 and 20, and Deuteronomy 32, verse 8 and 9. Therefore, viewers, other gods were given or allotted to the nations, but Jehovah was Israel's God. And this was clearly stated at Mount Sinai. So this is what God stated when he gave them the 10 commandments. Exodus 20, verse 1 to 3. And God spake all these words, saying, I am Jehovah, thy God. There it is. He said, I am Jehovah, thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. That is clear as day. God is saying that the other nations have their gods, but I am Jehovah, thy God. So viewers, let's just look at other gods versus the God of Israel. So what I've done is to place the 3 statements that Moses made, speaking about the nations being allotted their God and Israel being God's people. Notice again, as you see the 3 passages on screen. Deuteronomy 4, verse 19 says this, unless thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the host of heaven, shouldest be driven to worship them and serve them, which Jehovah thy God hath divided unto all nations under the whole heaven. But notice the contrast. But Jehovah hath taken you and brought you forth out of the iron furnace, even out of Egypt, to be unto him a people of inheritance, as ye are this day. And in Deuteronomy 29, verse 26, notice what he also said. For they went and served other gods and worshipped them, gods whom they knew not, and whom he had not given unto them. Notice the Hebrew word translated as given is Strong's H2505. It is the Hebrew word halak. Same word here, which Jehovah thy God hath divided unto all nations. Same word. This should be the correct reading of Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of men, he fixed the bounds of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. And notice the contrast in verse 9. For Jehovah's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. Therefore, viewers, when we put Deuteronomy 4, verse 19 to 20, Deuteronomy 29, verse 26, and Deuteronomy 32, verse 8 to 9 together, it's clear as day that the hosts of heaven that were allotted to the nations are called other gods, and they are also referred to as sons of God. This is how the nations surrounding Israel came to have other gods. But instead of ruling according to the will of the Most High, the sons of God became corrupt and unjust by leading the nations away from the worship of the only true God. So these angels became disloyal by leading the people under their authority into idolatry, where they worship the creature instead of the creator. But God has judged the sons of God and will reclaim all nations that were divided at Babel. According to the scriptures, the rebellion at Babel, which resulted in the division of the nations, occurred around the time of the birth of Peleg, and he was so named to remember this important event in human history. Notice Genesis 10, verse 25, and unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. There's the Hebrew script of Peleg's name. Peleg appears 7 times in the Hebrew scriptures, and his name means division. The scattering of the people into the various nations and languages occurred 1,757 years after creation and only 101 years after the flood. So just merely a century after the flood, mankind rebelled against God again, and that is why he disinherited them and disowned them. Here's a chart of the descendants of Adam. So we know that the flood took place 1,656 years after creation. And after the flood, Noah's 3 sons populated the whole earth. But here we are tracing the genealogy of Shem's sons. And here, Peleg, which we read in Genesis 10, verse 25, he was so named because of what transpired at the Tower of Babel. His name means division. He was born 1,757 years after creation. Here it is. So viewers, this is part 1 of this presentation entitled The God of Israel versus the Other Gods. The first 11 chapters of Genesis takes a universal look as it relates to mankind. After the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11, God scattered the people, he confounded their languages, and there resulted the formation of 70 different nations to whom God placed angels over to govern them. So as a result of what happened in the first 11 chapters, we can see a universal picture. In the next presentation, I will take it up from Genesis chapter 12 with the calling of Abraham. God was now going to choose one man. He was now going to get very specific. Choose one man, and he will form from that one man a nation called Israel. And through that nation, he was now going to reclaim all the other nations. Israel was to be a holy nation, a nation of priests through whom God will unveil his plan of salvation. Abram was going to be the progenitor of the seed of the woman that God promised in Genesis 3 verse 15 that will bruise the serpent's head. And God was now going to zero in on one nation, and from Genesis 12 right throughout the rest of the Old Testament, you will realize that it is Israel versus the nations and the God of Israel versus the other gods. So the next presentation will outline God calling Abraham, and through Abraham, he will take a nation for himself, and he will be their God, and they will be his people. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and may God continue to bless us as we continue to study his words. Stay tuned for part 2 of the God of Israel versus the other gods.